Coexistence in the Arctic is not just about living side by side, it's about thriving together. It means working collaboratively and bringing together our diverse perspectives to build a better world for future generations.
To me, coexistence in the Arctic means ensuring that the needs and interests of the key stakeholders that are found there are suitably taken into account, especially of the indigenous communities that live there and the unique nature that inhabits it.
Scientists rely on open source tools, packages, models, and programming languages.
If I give you a map tomorrow, do you trust that map? If you don't know who has produced that map, that's the big question. The question is not a technical question. We will produce maps by AI. We are able to do so. Can you trust it? That's the question. The main question to our societies and our technologies is the trust question.
What should our ambitions be? What are the potential effects of a digital twin of the Arctic and the increased use of AI in this digital twin concept for the Arctic?
Hello, and welcome back to this final big picture session where we're going to be focusing on insights into AI and the implications that artificial intelligence will have for this region.
Indeed, and I think AI would have been quite helpful in the first few days. You know, I'm thinking about the movie Avatar, you know, and like bringing some people here digitally, and I was wondering about my Arctic avatar, but I think that's a different kind of story.
Yeah, I do actually think augmented reality might come in very handy, but let's hope they don't replace us with avatars next year.
Oh no, we should ask Anu afterwards.
But certainly, when it comes to machine learning and AI, AI does look set to bring a raft of benefits from analysing real-time data for navigation to addressing emergencies and, of course, in search and rescue operations. But it is really crucial that all stakeholders are involved and that traditional knowledge can be incorporated into this future modelling of scenarios for the Arctic. So what we're going to do today is really investigate what needs to be in place to ensure the greatest participation and really the best benefit from this technology. So please do welcome our keynote speaker. He is Professor Victor Galaz, Associate Professor at the Stockholm Resilience Centre. Welcome.
Thank you very much. What an immense pleasure and honor to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. So, to talk about AI sustainability from my point of view, I want to start with what I see as a paradox in the use of AI for sustainability in general. And this will be a weird example, but I think you will enjoy it. So this is a short video from a Chinese online live stream site where you can shop online 24 hours a day. And this particular video is from the MIT Technology Review, and what they noted was that actually when you log into some of these sites nowadays, the people live streaming products for you to buy are not real anymore. These are deepfake influencers, allowing us to consume 24 hours a day in an automated fashion, and of course, to a much lower price, because you don't have to pay someone. You just create a deepfake. And I think this captures a little bit of what I see as one big dilemma in AI and sustainability. So for example, the carbon footprint of generative AI, and the numbers are not perfect, we know it, and we know the industry is trying to tackle it. Some estimates say that just generating one image from a generative AI model, such as ChatGPT, is equivalent in energy consumption as charging your cell phone from 0 to 100. That's a big energy footprint of a model. Another thing that I think found fascinating and also scary, another analysis that shows that we, at the moment, need to host a lot of dark data. So dark data is essentially data that we capture once and then store away to not use anymore. I mean, that happens. A lot of companies do that, academia do that, we do that. We have a lot of photos that we don't use. And that dark data is massive, has a big carbon footprint. So one estimate is that global companies around the world produce around 1.3 billion gigabytes of dark data, equivalent of 3 million flights from London to New York. So there's something here that I want to discuss, that I want to challenge, is the fact we often talk about the digital economy as a cloud. But in fact, we should think about it as a mine. It requires resources to create the hardware. It requires resources to keep the data service running, and it has a footprint when we use them. So that's one side of it. The other side of it that I find fascinating, and this is a beautiful story from Financial Times from a project called Project SETI. What you see here are sperm whales. You might know sperm whales from Moby Dick, the classic novel Moby Dick. And sperm whales have a habitat that spans the world, essentially. It's an endangered species. What scientists have done, and together with NGOs have done, they're able to record the sounds of the sperm whale and filter out all the noise and actually discover that sperm whales communicate through clicks. So that they communicate with each other, and they self-identify by using a language based on clicks, known as coda. Right? So I'm going to play that up. So these are two different communities of sperm whales moving around in the ocean, removing all the noise that you have, using machine learning and AI to discover and explore their social life. So that's the first community of coda from the Dominica. You can hear. So that's one dialect, and then you have another community that communicates in coda, but with a different pattern. I find that incredibly intriguing and interesting, that we can use machines to discover and listen to nature in new ways. That's another use. I have another colleague, and this is not just for fun. You can use this for monitoring. So I work with ecologists, so one of them being here, Jonas Hantati, he's here. Raise your hand, he's here in front, in case you want to talk to him. And there's a link to his work. So he shared his work a couple of years ago with me and said, well, they monitor guillemots living off the Gotland, or Stora Karlsö, which is a small island outside of Gotland, that's also an island on the Baltic. And by tracing and tracking the behavior and the number of guillemots and how much they weigh, you can actually say something about the Baltic. So by looking into their status and how they feed and how they behave, you can say something about the Baltic. So they become biological sensors of a rapidly changing planet. Stora Karlsö is one of the oldest natural reserves in the world. There's been research happening on that island, biological research happening for over 100 years. The difference is that now we can automate part of that monitoring. So that's what Jonas is doing, and they're using computer vision or object recognition just to see what are we seeing, and trying to figure out how can we use computer vision and AI to track automatically the number of seabirds in this colony, how much they weigh, and how they behave. And over that, we might be able to say something about how the Baltic is doing and changing over time. So that, to me, is a paradox in AI. We can use it for terrible things, and we can use it for good things. I would say that the most common way to think about AI and sustainability and climate change is to think about it as pieces of a puzzle of Lego. So you have one thing, an energy system, and then you think about, so how can I add AI to that to optimize something, right? I mean, that's a very common thing, bits and pieces that you put together. To me, and the way we approach it, is that AI is part of technological change on this planet that is deeply shaping the biosphere. So the biosphere is the sum of all the world's ecosystems, including the climate system. Without a biosphere, planet Earth would just be a dead rock floating around in space. But we have the biosphere, and now we're building a massive technosphere on top of it. So how do we change this? How do we direct it in a good way? Some of the things that I really think we need to think deeply about. There are challenges to these applications. This is one, related to bias. So very simple example from an image generation. You see the prompt in the top. Create an image of a watch showing 1 o'clock. Be careful of where the hands are pointing. Do you see where the hands are pointing? Systematically, 10 past 10. Why is that? Because the model is trained on images that you find online on watches that always show 10 past 10. because that is aesthetically appealing to the eye when you sell a watch. And this is a problem. I mean, it's a fun illustration, but what about other types of models? So this is another example from Bloomberg. The prompt is here. You just add different work categories, right? So you say, so give me a color photograph of a housekeeper. Give me a color photograph of a janitor. Give me a color photograph of, let's see what we get here, judge. You can see consistently how these models reproduce biases and stereotypes. This is a challenge. The industry knows it. We all know it. But still, we know for a fact that these systems, not this particular one, but AI systems with that type of bias, are reproducing inequalities in many sectors. I don't have time to go through all the results, but there is solid evidence in policing, recruitment policies, social welfare policies, etc. There are many, many instances where automated decision-making reproduces biases and harms the most vulnerable. What happens once we start to think about using these systems into climate-related issues? And how do we prepare for it? Right? Who bears the risk if we are creating AI models that fail consistently? And who's responsible if something happens? We made a very quick scanning a while ago, trying to see, so how can you use AI for climate change type of work? And we just put up 2 dimensions. So applications that are sectoral on the y-axis or multi-sectoral. And then applications that focus on analysis and monitoring, mitigation, climate adaptation, or climate transformation, which is in a point where you see, adaptation is not going to be enough. We need to do things differently. So that's climate transformation. So what we note consistently, and I'd be happy to be challenged on that, is that everyone, industry, academia, policymakers, loves to gravitate towards the bottom end. Monitoring, and to some extent mitigation. Most often ignoring adaptation and transformation issues. And why is that? This is my claim. I think the fact that the private sector is driving research and development, the fact that we need to build these models or where we have lots and lots of data, I assume you've heard that before throughout these 2 days, the fact that some of the efficiency gains that you will see by using AI means that you can save money and you can get high PR value, drives innovation into this space. And we need to break that pattern because we need something else, or we need more of adaptation and transformation. You know how the Arctic is changing very quickly. So what do we know? What do we actually need AI to do for us? And what is the AI industry and AI research offering us? Very briefly talk about, so Frank Pascal is one of the leading thinkers on AI accountability and law, and he said something that captured my attention because I think I agree that there is something in the debate around AI and its implications that I think is important. We have the first wave of accountability debate. Can we improve AI models? Can we make them more transparent? Can we use them in more responsible ways? Can we refine them? That's the first wave of accountability. But there's a second wave of accountability that has become more powerful in the second wave amongst researchers. And that has to do with rethinking whether we actually need those systems in the first place. Do we really need to build the systems? Which problems do we need to tackle using AI? And who is best placed to build them? And who decides how to build these? So to me, what I think is important, whenever we talk about Arctic AI or any application of AI for the planet, we need to start thinking about how do we move away or complement the current focus on prediction, optimization, and efficiency that is so dominant in this space to something that focuses more on co-development and uses of AI that support local solutions to people that matter. There's a big gap in there, and this is not going to happen by itself. This needs to be promoted intentionally. And the other thing, if we're clever enough and we're intelligent enough, we can use these tools to not only adapt to climate change and transform out of climate change, we can use it to listen to what nature has to say. If you're quiet, maybe you can hear it here. You hear it? That's nature. Thank you all.
Join me here on the panel and try not to trip.
What do you want me-
Yes, that's great, thank you. And also please do welcome up to join us Andrew Griffith, MP, Minister for Science, Research and Innovation from the UK. Welcome to the Minister. Thank you. Great to have you here. Thank you. Do take your seat. Also, please do welcome Hans-Peter Dahlen, who is the head of IBM's AI Governance Initiative in IBM. Welcome, Hans-Peter. Want to take a seat there? Yes, next to me, thank you. And also, Dr. Anne Kjersti-Falvik, who is the Executive Director for Innovation in Industry and the Public Sector of the Research Council of Norway. Welcome, Anne. Great to have you with us. Thank you. Do take a seat. So, Victor, it was a really fascinating presentation. And, you've covered so many topics there that we'll delve into as part of these sessions today. But I want to start with the much bigger picture, that second question, really, that you posed about, whether we should be using these models in the first place. Obviously, there has been a lot of headlines, real concern about where AI is heading, particularly in the military world, but also some of the effects that we've seen through social media, for example, already. Some scholars are actually asking, should we dismantle some of these technologies in some areas? I mean, is that even possible now?
I think it is. I mean, in the end, that's going to be a political question, as always. Like how you see the role of technology in driving technological change and how you regulate it, for example. But I think it is possible. I think if we learn from our failures in an honest way, we will actually abandon some of these things. You see that in the US. So predictive policing in the US, and some examples and analysis of predictive policing of these software models that tell the police where to go because it predicts areas where you will see crime. They fail all the time. They succeed. The latest analysis I saw, they were able to predict successfully in 1% of the cases. I think that opens up a social question to us, like, do we really need these models in that case? Should we even produce them? But again, it's a political question and something that we need to debate.
Okay, so Hans-Peter, from IBM's point of view, from your point of view, can you put the genie back in the bottle? Should we even try? What else should we be focusing on perhaps instead, and the frameworks around this bottle?
So I think it's important to understand that AI isn't new technology. It's been around, machine learning has been around since the 50s, right? And commercially, we were first, IBM were first with its Watson technology. We beat a couple of reigning champions in Jeopardy. And since 2011, we've done about 40,000 AI projects globally. We are tremendously optimistic about the potential of this technology. I agree with you that we shouldn't pursue use cases that doesn't benefit companies or society in general. Our AI ethics board recommended in 2018 that IBM pull out of facial recognition software, not because of the software, because of the inevitable racial classification that comes as a result of using it. And from an ethical perspective, that's difficult for a company like IBM. I will say that in 2020, we were the first, and as far as I know, the only one in big tech so far that's advocated in favor of introducing regulation of the use of AI. So stay away from regulating the technology, but recognizing the potential harm it can do to the user of the technology. So take a risk-based approach, which is what the EU are doing, which is what the UK are doing as well from a regulatory perspective. But I will say, though, from a company perspective, a company's reputation, potential for reputational damage, is bigger than breaking the law. And most companies have actually ethical frameworks that are bigger than that. So the genie shouldn't go back into the bottle. I think IBM thinks we need to continue to evolve, develop this technology, find the right use cases, right? With Watson, we tried to solve the cancer riddle, failed miserably, basically because we didn't have the data to succeed. We're getting more and more data. We're getting very good applications of AI. And for every example that you can show me that's bad, I can show you an example that's good. So this technology is tremendous. We have to govern it. and we cannot remove the human from the loop. And I have just one more point.
Yeah.
We are not great supporters of the term artificial intelligence. That term was coined in the 50s. That would imply that you take human intelligence and replace it with something that isn't. We consistently try to use the term augmented intelligence, because that's the purpose of this technology, to augment human intelligence, not replace it.
Okay, many thanks for that. Obviously, there is still concern that ultimately, further down the line, that eventuality could happen, that the human is replaced. What is the UK doing, Andrew Griffiths, to limit these concerns, allay these concerns? What, for example, did the AI Safety Summit at Bletchley Park throw up about the use of AI?
Yeah, thank you, Susanna. I like the term augmented intelligence, and the world needs that. I mean, goodness knows we have enough challenges. If we're going to solve some of the problems, we need the new materials that you can only create through AI. We need to be able to analyze data in new ways. If we look at the Arctic, it's often a hostile environment. We need the autonomy that's going to be able to help us understand that and get the data sets that we need. But we need that to be responsible. And I think what the Bletchley Park Global AI Safety Summit was about intentionality. It picks up on both of those points, really. There is a responsibility agenda. There's a huge agenda in terms of trust, bringing people with us on that journey. And so that was one forum. There's obviously the OECD is spending time on it, the G20, the G7. And so, as will often happen with new technologies, they move ahead, people come up with use cases, mostly positive, sometimes less so. And it is right that we as elected representatives come forward and try and get the right balance as to regulation that doesn't chill. I think generally that is evidence-based, that looks at the particular domain rather than looks at it as a general technology. I think that's broadly what certainly what we are doing in the UK, and I think that's broadly how people are thinking about AI regulation.
And how relevant are the discussions that were had at Bletchley Park, that safety summit, really relevant towards the Arctic as well?
Look, I think super relevant in the sense that, it's a really good use case and application of technology. And we've surfaced already some of the issues, making sure that the data sets, the technology is neutral, it's the data sets that can be biased or used in an unthinking way. It's the humans that can or cannot over-rely on the outcomes. And then there are some big domains, multinational domains, where you have to work together. And the UK's approach is at heart collaborative, because you can't regulate things like social media as effectively if you do so only on a particular territorial basis. But firmly we see the positive benefits of this, and we in the UK and the science community and researchers are absolutely using AI as that augmentation tool to deliver better results and do things that they couldn't have done if they didn't have that level of support and augmentation.
Okay, thanks very much. Well, let's get the Norwegian perspective now, and this is clearly a really potent, disruptive technology. What are you doing to try and make AI more trustworthy and transparent, and actually give people the confidence to use it in the best way possible?
Well, that's a big question. But I can talk a little bit from the Research Council perspective here. But first, let me start off with, we had a conference, maybe not as push as this, but a few years ago, 9 years ago, where we have invited a psychologist from Stanford. Actually, he was Polish, that had done some interesting psychometrics on Facebook pages, on people's profiles, photos, and the likes they got. And he showed us on the stage that he could predict the personality based on that. He could even predict I could predict a lot of things based on the photos and the profile. And that Facebook changed then that the likes we have on Facebook could be open to everybody. After that, the likes were only open to our friends. For us at the Research Council, that was like a wake-up call, because we did a lot of research at that time using machine learning, and we do more and more. But we get more and more aware of the role we have as a funding agency as an agency giving advice to the government, and also when it comes to implementation of AI in different domains, and AI as a research tool in itself. So now we just, this year, got a big new grant from the government that will be put into effect during this year, where the perspective of societal implications, trustworthy AI is the center of that. So up to now, we have more or less let things grow organically. Now we need to get a little bit more systematic thinking of how do we engage researchers? As Victor said, what kind of questions can AI be applied with value? Can it be applied on the right big issues? What's the kind of challenges we have? Bringing in also researchers from different disciplines. So there is a lot of interesting stuff going on now, from being, seeing it's growing, but now getting a little bit more systematic view on what's going on.
Okay, well, thank you. And obviously we have quite a big development with the EU and its AI Act. It's trying to some extent to limit these concerns and build trust. Hans-Petter, do you think they'll go far enough in that? And what approach, how would you define the approach that they're taking?
So they're taking fundamentally a risk-based approach to say we're going to leave the technology alone and we are going to regulate the risk it represents to the user of the technology. So they've introduced 4 categories of risk. And the first one is prohibited. That's things like social scoring. So your US crime predictive example would be or will be prohibited in the EU. It's a kind of social scoring. But interestingly, they've also, in the political agreement of the 8th of December last year, they've introduced emotion recognition in the workspace and educational institutions as a prohibited practice. We don't know exactly what that means, but that could mean sentiment analysis potentially, and also we know that some co-pilots, in lack of a better word, have the ability to attribute engagement scores from Teams meetings, for instance. That could be emotion recognition. So
that's quite scary.
In a way, because who sees that engagement score, And then high-risk use cases are typically things like recruitment, credit risk scoring, where there's a significant risk of discrimination. I just need, I'm not going to make this into a data discussion, I just need to feel the need to say this. Data itself isn't biased, data is just data. But because data is predominantly produced by white men, our data is lacking diversity. And the lack of diversity might give us some outcomes from our AI models that we don't desire. And we must also consider sort of bias as wanted bias and unwanted bias, right? Completely different discussion. But from an EU perspective, whenever there's a high risk of discrimination, that's a high risk use case. And that comes with a lot of regulatory requirements that they've sort of laid down in the law a little bit sort of lofty. Things like use high quality training data, which can mean a lot of things. But that will eventually translate into technical standards that companies will have to implement to be compliant. So the technical standards will define what a high-quality training set of data is. And then the 2 last ones, medium and no risk, which, by the way, is going to be about 90% of every AI implementation anyway, are not particularly regulated in that sense. You have to declare that you talk to a chatbot. You have to declare that you're looking at deepfakes. That's it.
Okay.
So far enough? Probably.
So let's take that and bring in the UK's perspective. So Andrew Griffiths, will you follow the EU model? What approach are you taking? How may it differ?
Yeah, well, we've obviously looked very closely at what the EU are doing. We won't be following their blanket AI law model. We want a more dynamic, agile approach. We think rather than regulate it as sort of hard law as a horizontal, when there are some really different domains, look at the regulation within those domains, be evidence-based. It's an emerging technology, right? I mean, the things that we'd be talking about now, some of those videos you showed simply wouldn't have existed 18, 24 months ago. So we should all be relatively humble about our ability to make laws with certainty and either capture all harm or not chill innovation. And so Our approach is collaborative. We will work with the EU, with many, many countries around the world on a shared endeavour, but we will be, I think, evidence-led, and we will look at the regulation in particular domains. So if you take the example well away from this domain of insurance and all of the obvious dangers about untrammeled use of machine learning in insurance, that should sit within the corpus of regulation that speaks to insurance today. We already have anti-discrimination mechanisms in insurance, and if we see augmentation of that, the right place to deal with that, as an example, would be within that insurance domain. It's not going to be violently different, but it is a different way, and we would say a more agile way.
Is there a potential problem with that, in that if you are leaving up to the individual regulators, could they actually come up with different interpretation of what they need to do? And so, in fact, AI could go further in some industries than others.
Well, it should go further in some industries than others, and that's the whole point about taking it as sort of an industry-led approach. Some will be more naturally benign. The use of AI to develop novel toxic compounds is not, something you want to use as much as you would in being able to analyze data and reduce really complex data sets in Arctic exploration or space down to something that's much more human interpretable. So the whole point is there should be difference. And as a philosophical approach, actually, where does the expertise sit? Does it sit at the very top with some, wise politicians and regulators, or does it sit actually in, regulatory domains who are very close to the industries that they're trying to regulate and achieve outcomes from?
Okay, thank you. I know you wanted to come in.
No, I just, by studying regulation in all types of technologies, I just find it so interesting that the AI innovation model is broken, so to say. I mean, whenever we talk about other technologies, whether it's medical technologies, financial technologies, or whatever, you would try to get that regulated early. But here, like if we talk about OpenAI and ChatGPT, what happened? They just released it globally. And then we were just following just to see, wow, these are the damages it's creating. We need to step in afterwards. And I think that's a model of externalizing risks on women, people of color, and other vulnerable groups, and taking those chances on those groups. That would be my opinion. And I think it's puzzling that we allow that to happen.
What parallels can you draw with, for example, Mark Zuckerberg from Meta up before Congress answering questions as well from families of those who say their children have been harmed by social media? Can you draw parallels from that, and perhaps what lessons we should learn now?
I think the parallel to draw, and I think that's where I might agree with the other panelists, is the fact that these technologies are very difficult to regulate. If we think about the birth of Facebook in the early 2000s, people were worried about the carbon footprint of social media or saw it as a possibility for democracy. Looking back, like what were the biggest impacts of social media? Massive misinformation, disinformation challenges, also some positive things. There's no way, or very difficult to see that in the very, very early days of Facebook, and we're probably in the same situation with AI as well. But again, there's a body of evidence in the last years, solid empirical evidence that shows harms from these systems on vulnerable groups, and that should be part of the conversation when we talk about the future of AI.
I think it is part of the conversation, which hence the need to regulate it. Just another high-risk use case. This I always use this. I think this one is interesting. Sorry, I'm thinking. Snapchat introduced My AI just before the general election in Denmark in 2022. The first-time voters asked Snapchat's My AI, which party should I vote for if I'm concerned about welfare or tax relief? And it was horrifically biased. And it didn't give all the options available. One example is it deliberately mentioned the two parties furthest to the left if you're concerned about welfare. I think most people would argue that every political party is concerned about welfare. We just have different solutions to it, right? And so I would imagine that's a use case that the EU is going to regulate as a high-risk use case, in which case Snapchat might opt to say, well, we're not going to allow generative AI to produce an answer to that kind of question because it's high risk.
Does that concern you, Andrew Griffith, those types of apps potentially? We have an election in the UK coming up, the use of that kind of technology to give really simplistic answers and that spread of misinformation. What can you do in government to try and stop that? And do you think your strategy will do that?
Yeah, I mean, and if I look at what we've done in the UK, we've taken a separate piece of legislation, an Online Safety Act, that deals with that specifically. It deals with misinformation, it deals with the protection of minors, it deals with the duties of care of social media companies. So I think that's a good example of saying it's not, you can't try and do that all in one horizontal piece of legislation, you know, just about AI. Not all of that harm comes from AI, or certainly doesn't all come from generative AI. A lot of that is just probabilistic algorithms that you don't even need AI to do. That you can hardwire those on a chip if you wanted to. So obviously the concern, I don't think any of us will be divided about the concerns, everything that Victor surfaced. There will inevitably be nuanced considerations about what is the best way to regulate and to legislate. And of course, the acid test isn't anyway, passing a corpus of rules. It's actually making them bite and deliver different real-world outcomes. I mean, the same would be true of sustainability.
Maybe this is a good example, the one use case you have here for, recommendation systems we used to. I mean, Netflix, Spotify, and we all love them. But if it's suddenly a snapshot just before an election in the hands of the youngsters, so it's same, but still a different target group, maybe a different user culture, so to say.
Which is why risks classify.
Right. That's
the use
why
case,
this is a kind of interesting discussion. It's not the same, though it looks like the same. So having awareness in, as you say, horizontal, but also vertically, how it's being used, because there is no one answer here.
But you're going to introduce a national body to do horizon scanning between the different regulators, right? To identify gaps in the regulation. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
And that's good.
Yeah. Let's look at data and the quality of it. I know, Anne, that's something that you've been focused on in particular. Data quality, as we've heard, it is a huge issue. It can lead to really outcomes that nobody wants to see. You highlighted with the police force, Victor, in the United States. Also, historically marginalized communities are disproportionately negatively impacted by this AI bias. So how do you change that? How do you kind of also keep up the effort to, if you do have a good data set, maintain it? Because it is a huge amount of effort, isn't it? What steps need to be taken?
Yeah. Again, if I talk from the Research Council perspectives, data is the fundament for research, and data is also key when we talk about AI and machine learning. And we have been funding infrastructure and data sets for years. And now, of course, we're very curious about how are data sampled, how are they created, bias in, bias out. You might not think data sets are biased, but I think data sets could be really biased. How are they maintained? Are they transparent? Can we rely on them? I think there was a lot of new questions coming up. Are they robust enough? And if you're going to trust, if I move a little bit away from AI as such, but more research results and using, and the impact of research, we need to be sure that the data have the right quality. And it's a big issue. It's a really big issue. And we saw during the pandemic a lot of good studies being done on a very limited set of data. I mean, it's quite scary when people, for very good reasons, start the research, but on very limited data sets. And when you combine that with a powerful tool like AI, you can come up with things you don't want to have in publications. So be careful about data sets, having high standards on the quality of data sets. And in this country, we tend to believe, and it might be right, that we have very good data sets, public data sets. Good data sets, industrial data sets, but having medical data sets, right? Good. And when we combine good data sets, if it's good, define goodness, and with AI, there is a need to be careful and go slowly, informed, and
yes. I'm going to bring in Andrew first because he wants to go.
Yeah, just if I may, one of the things, there's probably two things to think about. One is it's educating us, the humans that use the data. So it's having conversations like this, it's surfacing the problem itself and identifying that. And that's part of a responsible use of AI, is understanding what its limitations are. Often when new technologies come in, they're misused, but it's done so from a lack of full knowledge about the strengths and weaknesses. The second is often those challenges sit downstream of things that are really quite physical. Real world lack of connectivity, digital divide. If you've got whole cohorts, the fastest growing group of people connecting to the internet in the UK is now the elderly. But previously, there was a great digital divide, and therefore their data sets, all of the interaction, the dark data Victor talked about, was unrepresentative, not because of any bias in any system. It was simply an outcome, and that'll be true for rural communities, and my colleagues in the Foreign Office do a lot about driving connectivity in different parts of the world. If you look at medical revolutions, it's as important that we're building genome sequences of very diverse populations so that, again, those sequences are not simply representative of those who can afford the very high-end medical technologies.
To your point, I've seen an example of bias. If you ask one of these picture-generating models to draw a picture of an Oxford professor, 9 out of 10 times it will be a middle-aged white man.
Older than you.
Well, no, probably. I'm middle-aged. Thank you. But historically, that's not incorrect. So it's not biased, but it might not represent the view that we would like it to be.
Like the view
future-looking, right? So what is bias? Is it bias on what we would like it to be? Or is it bias based on historical data?
Well, let me bring in Victor, because you've talked about this. You've talked about intervening with AI to proactively mitigate harmful bias. So what are the best ways of doing this? And do you have to be careful about which line you're treading? Because it actually might reflect a society now, but not one potentially that you want to create in the future.
I mean, I'm just thinking in the context of the Arctic and the conversations we had this morning around indigenous knowledge, community-based innovation, community resilience, those type of responses. You need to think about, is there any way we can use AI to boost that kind of innovation and resilience? And I think for any application in that context, to gain control of that technology, first of all, I think you need to build partnerships. These are difficult technologies. You require resources. You need friends, right? So don't be alone. The other thing is to build capacities. You need to experiment with these tools to understand them and try them out. And then the third part is that you need to learn from your failures, because there will be mistakes. There will be many mistakes. And there might be a tendency, I believe, in some parts of the industry to not tell people about the failures, because it's not, the PR value is low, and you might have commercial incentives to hide that away. Not only in the industry, it could be other sectors as well. So be honest about your failures and learn from failures. That to me is the only way that you can have locally led, locally adapted adaptation and innovation that uses AI as an amplifier of what you want to do, rather than having these big models landing from the top somewhere and telling people what to do.
Do you think at IBM you've been honest with the failures that you might have had?
Yeah, I think so. We're quite honest and open about our failure with Watson Health, for instance. And why we failed. We actually when we started working with Watson Health, we used real-life data, and that was actually quite good. But then we were forced to use synthetic data, and actually Watson started to give counterproductive advice and things like that. So medical data is difficult in itself, because how do you anonymize it and don't trace it back to individual patients, right? I think the Finns might now have a secondary legislation that allows them to use second-hand medical data, which might enable us to train some of these models better. You can always trust the Finns to come up with a good solution. But yeah, I think we're honest about it. A lot of IBM researchers are doing a lot of work on training, I think improving how we train these models, because it's obviously not sustainable to use the power output of enough power to send the DeLorean back to the future, I think is what it took to train GPT-3. And that's not sustainable. So a lot of work is going on the chip level, where on the chip you train the models as well as the model itself.
Okay, and I know you wanted to come in on this point.
Yeah, it's just a response to Victor's reflection here, because in many ways, I feel we're discussing very similar things as we discuss with top-notch biotech. CRISPR, the scissor, we can cut genes and, do everything. But are we doing it? The Chinese scientists just doing it have not been very popular in the scientific community. It's regulated, it goes step by step, peacefully, taking the next step, using like a framework that often are referred to as responsible research and innovation, having involvement, transdisciplinarity, quite complicated, but really needed when you have very powerful tools and really face ethic challenges. So there are learnings from other, disruptive technologies and ways of moving ahead without, compromising too much.
Now, if you do feel confident you have the right quality data, would you say that AI is easier to train than in the past, Hans-Petter? And actually, will small community groups actually be at an advantage when it comes to the terms of AI use?
I think so. And we're experimenting a lot now with using foundation models to train other foundation models to make it more efficient. And that's really promising results as well. And our data is getting better. And we also have a better grasp of what the amount of data to use to train models properly. If we talk about indigenous groups, I think there's a fantastic opportunity to preserve language and culture through foundation models. So, for this region, for sure, why not secure funding for a Sami language model that will certainly secure or democratize the use of indigenous language, right? And that's not just for Norway, but for the entire region. Yeah.
And Victor, what communities in the Arctic, what can they learn from the experiences elsewhere in the world where trust has been built up? How can kind of data sovereignty be offered?
I can't give you that answer, but I know, there are communities already now exploring indigenous AI and what that means, and how you can combine these types of models with what we would call indigenous knowledge, which is deep knowledge about a place, an ecosystem in history, in time. And I think those are interesting combinations of these models with other forms of knowledge. So I think there is already that movement is already out there. Just team up and find them and develop them. But it's going to require, I think it's going to require some tough choices too. Like, you need to know what you want these models to do for you, rather than waiting for someone to offer you a solution to something that you actually don't see as a problem.
And that's a general trend, by the way, that the models are getting smaller and much more specific on task, what they're going to do. So, that's absolutely where we see the evolution of models going anyway.
Okay, Anne?
Yeah, we talk a lot about, infrastructure needed to utilize the potential and be careful when we go into this new era. And language models are being discussed a lot in this country, because when we sit there talking with this human like ChatGPT, it's all non-Norwegian culture kind of responses we get. You can get an answer in Norwegian, but it's non-Norwegian culture. So building language models, taking into account, the culture, the literature, all the specifics in the Nordic countries or in Norway is one of the tasks being discussed now.
And what's your perspective from the UK? The UK is expected to be pretty successful in diffusing AI across the business community. It's rated as number 3 in Capital Economics list of countries where AI will be integrated the most successfully. But what about society as a whole?
Yeah, look, I think we have to be all in as society as a whole on the productive uses of the technology. If we look at the biggest challenge that's facing us as a planet, the CO2 emissions and climate change, the answers to that to reconcile continued human prosperity, good human lifespans and quality of life, and a climate that continues to be sustainable in the long term, that is at heart an optimization problem. That's about not throwing away a very large proportion of the food we produce. It's about making sure that energy is conserved and used in productive ways, because it's a scarce resource. And good AI is fantastically good at that. I mean, there are rural community transport schemes. I mean, we don't often hear about all the good use cases for AI, because they often end up in the sort of middle or the back office. So we hear about all the difficult ones because they're all on the front page. We don't hear about the basic level of optimization of a community transport that makes a community transport viable that would not hitherto have been viable. We don't hear about the person who's trying to optimize food to be grown more productively for the planet that's more drought resistant. That is sometimes done in a lab, but there's sometimes and increasingly can be done in an AI augmented way. We've got our own little examples. The British Antarctic Survey AI Lab is looking at, can it chart the best optimal route for low carbon emissions from our research ship in the Antarctic. The Antarctic is obviously a pristine environment. Any reduction in its carbon emissions is fantastic in that very precious space. That's a really good use case for AI, and there are so many, because all of the bad things that we see in society, external emissions, congestion in our crowded cities, inefficient allocation of scarce resources, needs the positive productive power of AI. That is why it's so high stakes that we get the regulation exactly right. If we don't, we're not going to deploy it fully against some of those challenges.
That's great you make that point, because it's one of the questions which has come from the audience. How can we ensure AI doesn't only benefit states, the wealthy, and those already in power, but instead help the cause of marginalised and indigenous peoples of the Arctic? Do you think we're going the right way of doing that, Victor?
No, I don't think so. To be blunt. No,
yeah.
I think, I'm looking at it from an academic perspective, yeah. So that's my view on it. And also from an industry perspective, possibly, and also the innovation centers that I've seen trying to tackle climate change through AI. And I think, as I mentioned, most of the research and development is on the monitoring side, a little bit on the mitigation side. A lot of the things that are happening are not co-produced because it's difficult to do it. It takes time, and the incentives are not there to do it. For me as an academic, it takes a lot of time. I don't get my publications out. It's computing is expensive, etc. So I don't think we're not there. I think the potential is there. I think we can do it, but the investments and incentives are not there.
So what would you need from a big organization like IBM, for example? What could they do to help?
I think my position would be that we need those partnerships, but I think the bigger lever here are research funding. I think we need research funding that is adapted to the change we need in this type of research. And we need to have more stringent requirements on what are you actually producing, who are you producing it with, how do you follow it up, etc. That focuses maybe less on high-impact publications and more on local impact.
It's going to be a marriage between research and big tech. We're already doing it with NASA. So we've got this foundation model going with NASA geospatial Earth observations, basically, for crop predictions. It's predictive use cases, as you said. It's not the answer to everything, but this is a journey, and at least we're now taking steps in that direction.
Okay, Anne?
Yeah, there are some paradoxes there. I think in one way, it's all at our fingertips. We use it when we drive over a car, when we look at Netflix, we have a virtual assistant. So in our private lives, we use these tools. I see researchers using it a lot as a tool, maybe not for impact yet. So making sure that we focus on where can it do things for human well-being, not only increase efficacy in public sector or increase productivity in a certain industry, but do good things for human well-being in medical area, in education. And I think agencies like us and governments have also a responsibility trying to focus more on that, because if we make all these scary stories, I think we lose opportunities. And the paradox for me is that we're using it in our everyday life. We hear all the bad stories. I see it's being used a lot in research, but maybe we're just in the first part of the hockey stick here. So we need to mature and talk like this and really be there to make sure it's quality-based, make sure that the tools understood and used ethically, but maybe raise the big questions so the focus of the scientists are there, and even the big tech.
Well, and also automate enough mundane tasks so we as humans can use our immense capacity to actually tackle, you know, the big questions.
A philosopher have said that the last invention we will do is the AGI, because then it would do the rest for us for the rest of our lives.
Well,
I'm not sure.
We're going to spend a lot of time on the beach.
So there's lots of big questions here. Another one which has come from the audience. When AI is misused, accountability for errors seems elusive. To regulate AI usage, should responsibility lie with the developers or the users?
So, providers and deployers are the terminology that the EU have introduced. Which is actually more a relevant question after foundation models became an issue or a commercialized thing, you know. There are more than 300,000 foundation models available on a marketplace called Hugging Face. And the EU, with the political agreement of the 8th of December, have agreed on first of all, to introduce more roles into the regulations. So providers of foundation models is a role now that comes with obligations. Transparency obligations, first and foremost. Things like respect EU copyright law, and my favorite, provide summaries of the training data. What's a summary? And a couple of other things, you know. But no doubt, the application of the technology, the responsibility for that lies with the deployer. You know, so if you think of the foundation model as your fundamental technology in a way, of course that comes with some requirements for you as a provider. IBM provides foundation models, yes. So we understand EU's transparency obligations, but we don't control what our customers are prompting our models.
Is that the same approach, would you say, that the UK will take?
Look, I mean, the liability is, the responsibility is shared. I mean, bluntly, I mean, it's going to be the developers, the users, and indeed us as regulators. And I think, you know, when it goes wrong, quite rightly, people are dissatisfied with the whole supply chain. So I think, you know, everybody has to own their own responsibility in the system. You can discharge some of that responsibility, you know, by making sure that people have the right level of education to understand the risks, and that was a lot about what the AI Safety Summit was about, was just surfacing these risks and making sure they're being openly talked about, as we do accept in so many other domains in society. I mean, nothing that we do is riskless, but we educate ourselves about those risks, and then everyone in that supply chain understands where their responsibility lies. So I'm not ducking it. It's like everybody.
Yeah, but there's another question as well. How can the general public be prevented from using AI for negative purposes? I mean, can you actually do that?
I mean, yeah, for sure. But the only subtle difference is, you know, where that corpus of rules sit. I mean, we have vast bodies of criminal laws, and if you're using, you know, AI as a tool to commit one of those very many laws, then you're guilty of committing the law. It doesn't matter what the different supply chain.
But you can't kind of stop it in the act, as in a barrier before it gets to that point, as in using the technology.
I mean, it's hard to use you know, an enabling technology. I can use a fork to eat my supper, or I can do something nefarious with it. It's not the fork in that particular case. That's a trite example, but you know, those are the sort of things that one tries to do as a legislator and regulator.
Thank you. Do you have a point on that?
I don't think you can necessarily, and I also think it's really important to make a point that you can't regulate those that want to intentionally damage us anyway. Those that want to influence our elections, they will try, regardless of what the EU and the UK does in terms of regulation. And I don't think you can. Generative AI is a very general purpose type AI that you can. It's like a Swiss Army knife. You can use it for everything, and sometimes you pick the wrong tool. So the only way to fix that is to limit the number of tools available on your knife, and try to be more specific on the task. But I think the risk is there.
So thank you. So Victor, if kind of there's one thing that you would like the audience to leave thinking about, and what kind of proactive approach they should take going forward? What should they do? What's the big takeaway, do you think, from your presentation, from the debate we're having here?
I think we need to move beyond the optimization efficiency paradigm and think about climate and planetary change as its fullest, right? So include the oceans, include marine life, forests, etc., and tackle that and move our attention towards adaptation and transformation and use those tools to support that and do it in a way that's responsible. I think that, to me, if we can broaden the debate, the climate change AI debate, to that, I'll be happy.
Well, good news, because that's what's coming up in our second piece.
Beautiful.
A lot more detail. But I'd like to thank you for this really big picture on AI before we get down to more kind of granular detail. So many thanks for your contribution. It's much appreciated. So thank you. Thank you very much, Minister. If you want to walk up this way, that would be great. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you. As I say, we're going to move on to the second part of this debate, and I'm very pleased to welcome up onto the stage Camilla Brekke, who is the director of the Norwegian Polar Institute. So it's great to have you with us, Camilla. Thank you very much. Thank you. Do take a seat. I'll take the middle seat, so if you could sit at the end, that would be great. Also, please welcome Leslie Caravera, who's the CEO of Polarctic, which develops new, innovative artificial intelligence tools to solve maritime challenges. It's great to have you with us. Do sit here, Leslie. And also Sara Aparicio, who is an Earth observation data scientist. Hello there, Sara. Great to have you with me. Okay, so we've had the overview, a lot of the big kind of themes in artificial intelligence. Let's really focus down now onto the Arctic region. And Camilla, can you explain just how AI is offering the potential to gain really, really valuable insights about the environmental state of the Arctic? And what's your view on this kind of concerns about a one-size-fits-all approach?
Well, first, the Arctic is cold, it's dark, and we have harsh weather, as we have experienced this week. But we also have vast areas to observe and study. And it makes sense to use remote sensing technology, autonomous technology in the water, in the air, to sample these large areas. And if you top that up with augmented intelligence or artificial intelligence, I heard both terms here in the previous panel, it really becomes interesting. Then we can start to answer new research questions. We can find anomalies. We can really explore this region to a larger extent. But I think that we have to be careful, because we always need to have what we call the ground truth, so sampling the real nature to be out there also. So when you say this problem with one size fits all, I think that traditionally the polar sciences has been very much about going into the field, big logistics operations. And if we now are going to adopt artificial intelligence, we have to do it a bit slow and make sure that we are confident in the results, and make sure that we have ground truthing good enough.
Okay, thank you. So, Leslie, let me bring you in. With your work, how is your company helping solve really specific maritime challenges? And how many multiple model options are there? And to what extent is that so beneficial?
Yeah, absolutely. We're a data science and oceanographic company, and so we use computer science, math, and domain expertise to be able to train our artificial intelligence models. We've been focused on the ocean and really looking at that maritime area. When we started with sea ice forecasting. And as a business, we're able to iterate really fast on our models, providing the customers are giving us input, we're able to train new models and be able to provide that. And so we were able to create multiple types of models using different architectures, like a convolutional neural network, a UNet architecture, like lots of these different architectures have different capabilities. And we were able to take that and apply it to a customer use case. We had an individual client who was looking to go through the Northwest Passage, but the year before had been iced out, and so they needed to know when and where they could go. We were able to take our models and forecast 13 weeks in advance to the day the ice was going to break up. And we were able to save that client $1.3 million on that transit. And that not only saved the client money, it made it safer for them to be able to go across the Arctic. And we also were calculating those risk codes, the Polaris that we heard a lot about yesterday in the shipping panels. And we were able to calculate those risk codes, and we realized there's a lot more application for this than just looking and forecasting the ice, but understanding the risk of that. And so we actually have been working with Lloyd's of London. They're one of the largest insurance marketplaces to be able to understand that risk and calculate that with our domain expertise. I'm Alaska Native, I'm Yupik, and I grew up in Alaska. And so to bring that knowledge to the London marketplace and to provide that is, I think, it's a game changer for the Arctic.
Absolutely. And if you heard as well from the first panel, there's real concerns about the quality of data. But what does your company do to ensure that quality? Because it's almost like you're bashing the phones to make sure you've got the absolute best quality data as possible to build your models.
Absolutely, and I think the panel hit it right on the nail there with it's about trust and being from the Arctic for the Arctic. It's really important how we're able to provide that. We're able to communicate with, sometimes it's, it's our cousins, where we're calling them up, we're getting this information. We have good friends who are ice pilots who travel the Arctic, and so we are able to talk to them about their knowledge and expertise and how they see risk, because when you're on the bridge of the ship, it's different than the egg code on your chart and how you see that ice. And I know also there's a lot of traditional indigenous knowledge, and all of us from the Arctic know that snow can have different ways that it sounds, different ways that it smells, and all of these different parts of this kind of observational knowledge provide a really robust kind of modeling framework. And when you're able to provide those robust frameworks, this diversity of models leads to those robust solutions. And there's a really important framework for that, for the data that comes from that. And I know there's a lot of academics here, and this is going to be probably a bit pointed at you guys, but you're an extractive industry. And the mining companies extract minerals, oil companies extract crude, and some of the academics extract knowledge. And it's really important that as we're taking that knowledge, we're making sure that we're providing it and treating it with the care principles. There's a great that the IARPC group came up with. It's collective benefit, authority to control, responsibility, and ethics. And as we're collecting that data, we need to make sure that it's robust, it's protected, and the people who own it can actually own it, and it's not taken and extracted and removed to some sort of ivory tower, where then it's not allowed to be accessed by the people who need it.
Okay, and Sarah, I can see you nodding there. So you're looking at this both from the kind of input, but also from the right tools that you're using if you want to use that data and you use those AI models. Can you just tell me a little bit about your experience in teaching people how to use the best AI tools?
Yes, one of the main outcomes that I come across when teaching people that are normally newbies, people that had zero experience on AI, is that they are overwhelmed with the amount of algorithms that are out there. So if one is lost on the beginning of AI, it's either for two reasons. One is because they want to know more about it and they don't know where to start, or they already know they want to use AI, but they don't have the right question to make. I'll give an example to not be so abstract. I have these two friends, let's call them John and Peter, real people, deep fake names. And one of them, John, he was very enthusiastic about whales, and he wanted to predict things with whales. And he came to me and said, I want to know, there's a correlation about the temperature and the algae blooming in a certain location, and I know this is correlated with whales. How can I use AI to know about the whales? And I asked them, what do you want exactly to know? Do you want to see a whale in a picture? You want to understand the probability of a whale passing by? And he could not answer to this, and also didn't have also enough data, which brings to what Leslie and Camille were saying. Training data is essential because it's the backbone of AI. So without this training data, it could not go anywhere, especially deep learning, because it's very data hungry. On the other side, we had Peter. He's an entrepreneur, and he had a clear question on his head. He works in a company as a driver, and they use many cars, and he has a lot of experience on knowing which car to pick up, and depending on weather conditions, the amount of weight they have on the car, and so forth. And he had the exact question, I want to know how can I predict the amount of fuel I can get? So it was, can I do this with AI? And I said, yes, this is a very simple regression problem, and it's a tabular information. Go check this information. So it's very critical to have the clear question on your head, and also the most important thing on AI, which is the training data.
Absolutely, and you explain it really clearly. And drawing from what we heard in the first panel, is there a danger that we're kind of overkilling the use of AI, and actually you don't need to use it for certain practices, and in fact you may well be wasting your time?
Exactly. AI, machine learning, and deep learning, we all hear about these terms, and maybe we think deep learning, this sounds more deeper, more powerful. Yes, indeed it is. But sometimes we don't have enough training data, or we don't need to go and use so much computer power computing capacity just for one single task that you can very easily do less fancy statistics, because we heard the term about augmented intelligence, but there is another way of calling artificial intelligence that I quite like it, which is fancy statistics in the end. So.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. Well, let me bring back in Camilla. I mean, we heard there from Leslie about how AI is kind of like a mining industry in itself, and you work, of course, with lots of scientific communities and stakeholders. How do you get their buy-in to this? You know, bearing what Leslie is saying as well, how do you get their involvement? Because it is absolutely crucial that they're involved.
Well, as the director of the Norwegian Polar Institute, we have in our mandate to advise the government on polar issues. And I'm thinking that the artificial intelligence and augmented intelligence would give us an informed decision, a support to decisions that will make the basis for the advice that we give. But it's very important, I think, to be aware that we have to trust, we make sure that the data that goes into the models, that we can trust those, that they are not, we had a lack of diversity issue. And so I think we have to be careful how to use this to support our role, basically. But I think that it's important for the Arctic scientists to really own their AI, their models, to own the data, the training, everything, the whole process, basically, to feel confident, and also to make sure that there are no issues with the lack of diversity, for example, in the data sets. So,
yes, and you talk about that. Of course, the Russian territory and scientific data and observations are largely out of action. So how can you, from your perspective, re-establish that data flow? And also, then, can you trust the data that you're getting if you do re-establish that data flow?
That's really a political question. Will there be a re-establishment of the scientific connection to Russia? Will we have a tunnel where we can get the climate data from the large terrestrial areas in the Arctic, which is owned by Russia. It's now not available to us. That's potentially a democratic and safety problem when it comes to predicting climate change. If that happens, that we get an opening and we get access to those data, can we trust the data, or are they corrupted? Are there any issues with those data? I think we have to take this step by step, and yeah, like I said, it's a political question, at least to start with.
Yes, and Leslie, is that posing a problem for you, getting hold of the data, particularly kind of Russian observational data? Because of course, you know, if you're trying to use your modeling of the entire Arctic region, it must be very difficult.
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely gaps in data, and that's a big problem. One of the things we're working on currently is a digital twin of the ocean, and we're modeling the fisheries in that. And to be able, and when we're doing Alaska, you have the Bering Strait, and half of the Bering Strait on the other side, there's a bunch of fisheries and crab data that now we're missing. And it absolutely is a big challenge when you're looking at creating these different models and having that sort of data, especially as decisions are getting made off that. So there's been a lot of, like, the crab fisheries in Alaska was shut down because of the trawls that they did, and when they scooped up the crabs, they just weren't there. And there's a lot of concern over what caused that. And without having that data, that becomes a big challenge and a big question.
Obviously, you're working with Lloyd's of London. Do you think we may underestimate, in some ways, the specific benefits that AI models can bring? And do you think, you know, just how big is the potential from your point of view?
I think it's incredible, especially being, again, from the Arctic and being able to provide this to communities, friends, families, other businesses, and to be able to show the whole value chain that AI can support, providing that hindsight, insight, foresight, and the hindsight being what happened, and being able to take old data and use maybe it was logs written by a whaling captain, and being able to take and translate those pages into actual text to be searchable. And then you're able to say, why did this happen? And you're able to take different insights and correlate that and have different parts to be able to create new insights into why it happened. And then you're able to create that, how do we make it better? And how do we adjust to this and create almost what we're trying to do with our digital twin is create we call them counterfactuals, where you're able to ask it, what if? What if I fished this many pounds of cod out of the ocean? How would that affect the biodiversity and sustainability of the ocean for the next 5 years? And you're able to see that through predator-prey models, and it's these actions and reactions that the model is able to provide you.
There's a question here which has come from the audience. How should education change in order to prepare the citizens of the future for a society where AI is even more integrated than today? I mean, are you concerned about the lack of wider education, Sarah, in this respect?
Maybe this is a little bit biased opinion, but I think one of the important blocks to start to learn AI is to have programming skills. And there are plenty of languages out there, and one of them, Python, is very easy to start with. And I think this is something that should be not just aimed for engineering courses, because it can be applied to so many fields. I think this is one of the things that education will need and would greatly benefit whoever wants to start right away with AI, because mostly if you want to do something with AI, it's very advisable that you have already some background on programming language, otherwise it's tougher to start.
I'm not sure what that was. Sorry for the interruption.
Yeah,
but just if people here in the audience, you know, if they want to use AI in their field, what are the steps that they need to go about to do exactly that?
My advice will be, first, create your learning path. If you want to become an AI expert, this is your career path, maybe I would advise, okay, take a degree. But most of us don't have the time or are not in the stage of life of starting a new degree. So my recommendation is to go for online resources. There are plenty of them out there, some for free. And I would specifically, once again, very biased because this is my own experience. I think there are very amazing resources that you pay a bit monthly. For instance, you get a specialization on AI. You get motivated because you feel that you are enrolled on something, and it goes through theory and exercises and do hands-on, which is crucial. So this will be my second advice. First, understand what is the goal. Then if you go for these online courses, go for it there. I don't know if it's okay to make publicity, but there is these platforms like Coursera that they have amazing materials, especially from Andrew and G, a big name on AI education. And then after that, if you either apply it or if you want to keep exploring, there are plenty of libraries on AI in tools. And most importantly, keep practicing and playing. There are many platforms as well that are open and full of enthusiastic community that if you are stuck in some exercise, there are a lot of people online somewhere in the world that will, on a forum, reply to you within 1 hour. So it's just learning about AI just at the top of your fingertips.
So it's a great community online. Camilla, what are you doing to kind of encourage the scientific community to get more hands-on and to really embrace this?
I think that thinking about climate change and environmental studies, I think that AI could help us to go from kind of observations and the state where we are today and to look into predictions, into the future. That's what we need to know. We need to know what's happening with the sea level rise, for example, related to the melting of the ice caps. We need to look into the future. And I think that AI can help us to do that.
Okay, thank you. And Leslie, what steps would you advise people to take, if they're still kind of hesitating about just how AI can really move the dial for them kind of in their own individual research, but also for businesses? What should they first be thinking about?
I think you've hit it straight on the nail where they have to have the question. And I think that's one of the biggest things to come at it with. And we've had people come to us and they're like, we would like to use the AI. We're like, oh. So I think it's an understanding. And I think there are so many great resources, just different podcasts, videos, online courses where you can learn about it. And I think it's very, it becomes almost prohibitive when you start saying artificial intelligence, where people think, oh, I have to be really smart to do that. And so they don't think like, oh, I could learn this, I could understand this. But my background was not artificial intelligence. I know it looks like this is just light on my hair, but they're actually grays. And I'm quite old. And so it was, when I grew up, there was no artificial, it was the AI winter. And there were no courses, there was no information. And so almost everything we've done has been very self-taught. And that's how we started our company. And it was because we saw that there was a real need. And we saw that we could be a gap, or like fill that gap, and as a bridge between the academics, the policymakers, and the people who actually need it and implement it to operationalize that AI.
And Andrew Griffiths, MP, was saying earlier about the British Antarctic Survey and their modelling about how it can really reduce CO2 emissions. To what extent do you think that AI will be a game changer in this respect? What are you doing? What are some of the projects you are involved in? You can really see that happening in real time.
Oh, absolutely. So the project where we were able to forecast when the ice was going to break up, that reduced the demurrage cost for how long the ship was going to sit at the port. They didn't have all of or they were just idling and using extra gas. They were able to hire the ship for the right time and right place. They weren't traveling extra far. There's a whole bunch of just really little things that you can see that really start to add up when you start doing that.
And then just finally, one question. We've only got a short amount of time, but many, if not all, EU and US funded environmental research programs that produce data are open source. What are your thoughts on missing Arctic data sets that governments can fund or fill in gaps in data? Would that help with that extra government funding?
I think the funding should go to the indigenous communities, and they should be able to create their own way of storing and protecting that data and allowing it to go to researchers that have questions and answers that they need support with, and that there's a new shift in the power for the Arctic for the people in the Arctic.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think that really does sum up this entire panel debate in many ways, and making sure that all the information, all the knowledge out there is gathered for the future use of artificial intelligence. So thank you so much to the panel, much appreciated. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. You can walk off that way, please. So that certainly does round up the day, Andreas, and really it is that knowledge sharing, but also that real focus on mutual respect and trust. And trust has been such, a key word that is, you've got it written down on your sheet as well.
Trust,
trust has been such a key word, hasn't it, during this whole conference. But also pragmatism, looking at solutions in a step-by-step basis and with a kind of sense of cooperation and compromise in many respects.
Yeah, and also in the morning we heard what can we do for the Arctic, and now a bit the common line, what can the model do for us and the way for the Arctic. So that was really interesting, a fantastic panel. I really enjoyed it because I know nothing about AI. So, but we're not done. I want to say that before we really finish, Arctic Frontiers Big Picture might be over, but we have another session at the Frum Center from 3:30 onwards about leaders in ocean space. So really join us there to hear more about their stories on leadership and the ocean.
Fantastic, thank you. But to round up the big picture sessions, I'm really delighted to welcome back onto the stage Anu Fredriksson, who's the Executive Director of Arctic Frontiers. Welcome, Anu.
Minister, Excellencies, dear friends. Earlier this week, in one of my speeches, I quoted an old proverb. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. On behalf of Arctic Frontiers, I want to thank you for choosing to go together with us this week. All of you here today have chosen to resist the harsh headwinds we have experienced this week. You might have attended Arctic Frontiers at one of the numerous watch parties at different airports. You might have been rerouted through Central Europe and faced days of delays, but you made it through. Because the Arctic matters. We came here to equip ourselves for the choices we know we must make. And I believe that we leave Tromsø equipped with both new knowledge and networks. I want to thank Susanna and Andreas for excellently guiding us through this week's program. And this year, more than ever, I want to thank our amazing, flexible, dedicated AV team, production crew, designers, and absolutely not least, our team, Arctic Frontiers. The headwinds were hard, but we made it through because we walked together. As the week comes to a close, I invite you to take a look back at Arctic Frontiers 2024. With these pictures, thank you for choosing to go with us, and welcome back to Tromsø and Arctic Frontiers 2025.